HanselMinutes.com. It's Hansel Minutes, a weekly discussion with web developer and technologist Scott Hanselman, hosted by Carl Franklin. This is Lawrence Ryan announcing show number 100, recorded live Tuesday, February 12th, 2008. Support for Hansel Minutes is provided by Telerik RAD Controls, the most comprehensive suite of components for Windows Forms and ASP.NET web applications. Online at www.telerik.com. In this episode, Scott talks with Microsoft CTO Norm Judah.
Hi, this is Scott Hanselman, and this is another episode of Hansel Minutes. This is, in fact, our 100th show, and I am lucky enough to be sitting here at Microsoft Tech Ready 6 in Seattle, Washington, with Norm Judah, the CTO of Microsoft Services. Thank you, sir, for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to me.
Hey, Scott. Nice to be here.
So you're the CTO, Chief Technology Officer, of a very, very, very large section of Microsoft, if not, do we have more than one CTO?
Not inside of the services organization.
Okay.
In the field, I'm the only one right now.
Okay. So how many people do you have underneath you?
So Microsoft Services is a worldwide organization spread across all the geographies, from consumer support all the way through enterprise support and consulting, and all up, there's about 16,000 people.
Wow. And that's a non-trivial number. And we're talking about people in all over the world. So like your point is that you might have MCS Poland and MCS South Africa and MCS whatever.
And MCS Vietnam, that's just opening up, and Thailand and Latin America.
Wow.
So it's both big and small.
And they have local MCS people. So if you're in MCS Thailand, you might very well be Thai, or you could be from anywhere in the world.
Yeah. No, and as Microsoft opens up offices around the world, one of the first part of the office is we've got to provide support. If we're going to sell product, how do we provide support and consulting? So very early in the incubation of new countries, services is there.
And these are people who have their own culture and their own style, but at the same time, the company has to have its certain culture and a certain style. I mean, when I got hired at Microsoft, they were asking the question, I didn't realize this until after the interview, but is this a Microsoft hire? Will he fit in with the culture? We hire for the company, not for the position. How do you make sure you have consistency of talent, of culture across 16,000 people?
So there are actually three dimensions to the hiring problem. One is the Microsoft culture, which is how do we, the Microsoft type A personality. And Microsoft's not right for everybody. And so do you fit into the company? The second one is, do you fit into the local culture? And that is very different as we expand through new geographies in Eastern Europe, Latin America. The local culture is also very important. But some work that we did about 3 years ago inside of services is to layer on top of that technical communities. In other words, if you're a database guy and you're in Malaysia, how do you connect with the database guy who's in Brazil or who's in Chicago, who's in Paris? And so we've layered in this big matrix organization both the geography and then the technical community. So we provide the connection across those multiple dimensions. And then we add industry on top of that. So any individual, for example, sits at an intersection in a multidimensional space of country, geography, technology, industry, maybe vertical, maybe horizontal. That really starts to define who you are as an individual and how you contribute into the overall company.
That's really interesting. Now, as someone who has built a small online community, one of the things that I've tried to foster is a sense of positivity, of welcoming, a sense of if you don't know the answer, it's okay. There needs to be a safe place to ask questions. Not every culture in the world values, for lack of a better word, values incompetence, much like like the U.S. does, like some countries do. Do you have any trouble with people being so good and so type A that that aspect of the culture is, do you understand what I'm saying?
So we see interesting behaviors inside of the communities. We do see a lot of that. We see those who contribute into the communities, those who ask questions, those who give good answers. But we actually also see the people who come in and say, no, this has been answered a long time ago. Go look at the fact. You can find it. Do your homework. And so communities have to be self-managing. And it turns out that in the Microsoft culture, there's enough self-management to spank the people when they're ill-behaved and to instruct the people when they need help.
Interesting.
And so our communities are about 1,000 people each. Some are smaller, some are larger. And the interesting fact is how long it took us to get the communities running. And when we started it, we went out, did quite a lot of research on the open source communities and some of the other consulting companies, but nobody had really done what we were trying to do. We couldn't find anybody. And so we did it bottoms up. We looked at the MVP process that's in place, sort of the Microsoft outreach to folks out in our customer and partner base. And then we sort of implemented our own version of that. And what we figured out is it took us about 2 years to get it to be self-sustaining and self-feeding. You have to get to that critical mass of activity. And there are a couple of key things that we did along the way to drive that. But once you get there, you can't stop it. Once you get over the edge, over the chasm, but you've got to care and feed for it. So I have, for example, reporting to me community directors whose job it is to care and feed for those communities. And that works. So you have to have that. Self-sustaining communities always have to have some notion of somebody who's causing it to happen, not necessarily leading it,
right,
but causing it to happen.
Yeah, kind of the eternal watchmaker. You know, so you build that watch and you let it work, and you may have to tune it up a little bit, point it in a certain direction, but for the most part, it'll handle itself.
Very much so.
Now, as someone who has a number of years of history in the business, I always find it really interesting to talk to people who've been in the business a lot longer than I have. I've been doing this for about 15 years, and the speed at which things have happened, even in just my 15 years I ran a bulletin board and I had, if I had 3 people dialed into my bulletin board at once, that level of concurrency and, multiple chat was amazing. So I'd built a little community of a couple of hundred people. And now you can throw up a forum board and put together a community of a couple hundred people and a couple thousand spammers within a few seconds. What is your sense of history as far as how community builds over this last 30 years? I mean, communities were labs in colleges before, weren't they?
The cultural aspect of communities has just turned out to be one of the interesting social engineering problems that we've tackled deeply in this case. The historical perspective has always been the community was very local because you weren't connected.
Right.
So it was a bunch of guys who got together for beer and pizza on Friday. But what you miss with that is the diversity of the community, because the guys who are getting together for beer and pizza are all the people who are in the same office, in the same space, in the same geography.
Right.
The value of community is the diversity. And, there are many folks who look around at systems and applications produced in this country, and I'll typically, and at TechRead I do this all the time, give stereotypical examples of applications that are not here. I'll give you a quick example.
Okay.
We have a great application that we're writing in China with one of the mobile operators in Beijing.
Okay.
And it's around creating an instant messaging system driven off an SMS backbone.
Okay.
They're going to pilot the system just to test it out. And the pilot's going to be with 7 million users. And if the pilot works, then they'll scale it to about 200 million. And if that works, they'll then roll it out to billions. And so the magnitude of the problem set is so different that the diversity of the community is really important. And, there's another guy who's somewhere else who actually has another interesting aspect on it. So historically, the span of contact has been the thing that has changed. What are the tools that we've got to be able to do that? So beyond the guys having beer and pizza, you might have held an event. There was a North American event or a European event. And so you would have started to get some people together there. So your geographic span has expanded because of air travel. And maybe you were running a dial-up bulletin board, as you said. But generally, the people who are in the bulletin board are pretty dedicated.
Yeah.
What you have to do is make it a natural way of people's lives. For the community to work, they have to have a place where they can go when they're in a customer situation, don't have access to your private networks, and they can get to that information and get to it immediately. So the change of the internet and the immediacy of information, you have to replicate that in your community, because if I can't find it quickly, I'm gone.
We had a discussion on my blog a couple of months ago about the concept of the third place and the idea that in sociology, someone needs home, work, and elsewhere, where elsewhere is either a bar or a church or whatever. And people were saying that for a lot of people that the internet has become that third place, or a blog or a forum, and whether or not that was a healthy thing. And it's interesting to see other cultures find that third place. It's interesting, like in Africa, my wife's from Southern Africa, and we've been to Tanzania and Zimbabwe and South Africa, and the third place is SMS. It's chat. And that's amongst people who don't necessarily have computers. But that sense of mobile information has been getting me thinking about that gap between the laptop and the phone that seems to need to be filled. And people keep trying to shove devices in there, Microsoft Origami and different tablets and things like that. I'm kind of rambling, but I keep wondering if we're going to have some kind of a roll-up tablet device that's going to give us that 4x6 card.
Well, I think the interesting thing about mobile devices across the generations that you've described is that the half-life of the device and the rate of change in the device far exceeds the laptops that we've seen. And that the good thing is that phones are kind of disposable. It's a good thing and a bad thing because we're not sure what to do with these disposable phones and how we treat the garbage that we create with that. But the recycling of the phones and the generational movements about the movement that we've gone from barely connected telephones into 3G phones today and then 3.5 and 4G phones, and your ability, it's this immediacy of information contact and how that is going to provide access either through voice. You'll talk to your phone and somebody will come back to you and actually might be a Turing machine on the other side. You don't know that's going to come back and give you this information. But as people travel around and as you're not always in your first place at home, you actually are still connected.
You'll always be in your third place.
Yeah, you always have this notion of partially connected and connected when I really need to be.
Yeah, we've been watching this community called Twitter develop, and Twitter is, I mean, other than the fact that you have to use your thumb keyboard to get your 140 characters out, it's basically whatever thought is in your head at the time, something goes out on the wire, and the scary part is that it's archived for all eternity.
Right. Well, the thing I find fascinating about this is we've done a lot of work looking at the generational aspects of user experience. And the user experience that we might have and the expectations that we might have are very different to those of my kids. I have two kids who are just in college.
Okay.
One's a junior and one's a freshman. And their ability to deal with multiple streams of information concurrently across multiple modalities, the phone, IM, music, and God knows what else going on. And some of it's about work, but some of it is not.
Yeah.
Their ability to do that is one thing. And the second thing is the anonymity of information that they will publish. And it's both frightening and fascinating.
Yeah, yeah.
But the thing I find, the part that we're interested in looking at is, so when that generation in 5 years' time starts to be the strength of the workforce, what are they going to expect from business applications, from CRM applications, from how are they going to apply for a mortgage? It's not going to be on 11 by 14 pages with 17 signatures on it. It's going to be different. And so that's the part that I'm interested in. So I want to come full circle because you sort of alluded to this a little bit earlier on, which is what does a CTO do?
Right.
That's one of the things that a CTO does is what are the things that we have to be doing as a technology company that empowers the scenario I just described? What are we going to do from a tools perspective, from an infrastructure perspective that allows those applications to be built? There's a talk that I've done periodically, which is called Architectural Discontinuities in the Last Mile, which is what are the architectural discontinuities that are coming? And then how do we close the gap of that architectural last mile? And laying that out to 16,000 of your closest friends so that they can communicate it to their customers. And here's the problem set. And by the way, this is as a company, this is what Microsoft is going to do about that.
Now, when you've got all these cultures and all these modalities and these multiple dimensions, and I mean, at this point, these things can't be described in a two-dimensional graph anymore. I mean, we've got more dimensions than we can visualize. How do you take things that are just part of the business, like certifications? Like if someone says, all of our customers are MCS whatever, star.star, maybe all of our consultants should be MCS star.star. I'm sure discussions like that must happen, but maybe they're not appropriate on a cultural basis. Maybe one culture doesn't think that testing is appropriate. I mean, are those the kinds of fights that you deal with? Because we have to deal with that at our, I was going to say our company. I've worked at Microsoft for 4 months. Previously, to keep our status, we had to, be a solution developer or whatever. Are MCS people
so it actually
certified?
It is something that we're driving. So at this event, Tech Ready, which is an internal Microsoft event for our technical field, it's sort of like Tech Ed internal, is the way of thinking about it.
Yeah, exactly.
We actually have the ability for people to take certification courses here, and there'll be about 1,200 exams that people will take here. By the way, not everybody passes the first time through.
Yeah, that's true. I know that too.
I know that too. And so we actually have a lot of these things that are going on here to actually drive that same level of certification. But we have a double dimension problem that somebody outside of Microsoft doesn't have. Is one, you have to know about the current set of products. And as a Microsoft consultant and having I actually joined Microsoft in 1990 as the first architect in consulting when there were 20 people.
Oh, wow.
And it's interesting when you're the Microsoft consultant and you're inside a customer, you're the Excel macro guy, the PowerPoint color code guy.
Exactly.
You might actually be the middle tier data architect as well, but you're Microsoft when you're there, and the expectation of the customer is that you actually know or can find out about a lot of stuff. And so there's this expectation of ambient level of information, which is almost impossible to sustain. And then you have to know about what's coming and how the current things, the current technologies are going to be morphing and changing over time to be something else. And so the accreditation problem actually is a necessary but insufficient. Exactly. In this case, we've got to get beyond there.
Right. Yeah, you went exactly where I thought you were going to go with that. I appreciate that. As someone who worked with large banks in all over the U.S., I worked for a company that did banking, and we always came up against IBM. And the joke was in the early 2000s was that my IBM developer, my IBM consulting services person has 20 years experience, and my Microsoft consulting person is 20. And this was the case in the late 90s, and it's been really interesting to interact with a lot of MCS people in the last, kind of 5 to 6 years, that have really kind of, hardcore experience, 10, 15 years working in like large banks in the Northeast and things like that. Was that just a matter of the maturity of the organization? I mean, MCS just had to get older?
Well, it's older and more mature. The problem set that we're dealing with changes. Sort of MCS version 1 was about infrastructure, was about deploying OS 2 at that time.
Good times.
Getting an infrastructure in place, followed by the apps. Today, it's actually very different. Today, there's a part that's about infrastructure, there's a part about applications, and there's actually a new initiative that we're driving. We're just creating this called Engineered for Health. Is how do you actually design applications that are built to be healthy? How do you design applications that are built to be green? So a lot of work that's going on in that space. So there's different problems being solved.
Yeah. And
the altitudes, the level of sophistication of those problems is different than it might have been 20 years ago.
Well, writing an application to be green is really, did we know that the background spell checker in Word was going to cost us battery life?
Right.
And to write an application that has to deal with that additional set of input. We used to think that input started at the keyboard and kind of ended in the program, and now you've got other bits of context flowing in from the machine.
Well, there's many notions about the stimuli that drive the system, be it input or remote access or whatever. But there's also been this fundamental architectural assumption that was made with most applications, which is big stuff at the middle of the application. And by the way, the big stuff is always there, so it's always synchronous. And if you're going to build an application that's green, that assumption is no longer valid because your database might be quiesced for power reasons. Or a device might not be there. You have to wake it up. And so when you start to superimpose green assumptions, your programming model changes completely, and that your assumption has to be that the other guy should be there but might not be. And then how do I wake it up?
Wow. See, we're coming to the end of our time, and this gets interesting. I've got to talk to you and find someone who can sit down with me and talk about green computing, because you just blew my mind. I know that the rise of asynchronicity was upon us, certainly within a world where it didn't exist previously in the Microsoft programming model. For a lot of people grew up in VB6 and tried to shoehorn asynchronicity into things, but now we have things like WCF and REST models. Wow. You blew my mind. I have to go and think about that.
I'll add one more thing,
please.
Which is virtualization actually becomes a key part of that, because my app server might be completely virtualized, and if I actually need to add another virtual image of the app server because of load, the consumer of that app server might have to quiesce for a minute while the virtualization engines actually provisions another app server that might be in another geography.
Yeah, that's hard. I mean, Outlook and Exchange is the kind of canonical example.
Right.
When sometimes, this has been the case for Outlook, so I don't feel like I'm picking on them, but you send an email and then maybe the internet goes down or the wireless goes down and everything stops because putting a byte on the wire is a blocking call.
Right.
It's a challenge, and it goes all the way down the stack.
It does. And so we're all starting to think a little bit about green and what it actually means to our apps. And I'm not sure that how much people have thought about the fundamental changes to the application architecture.
Wow. Well, that's given me a whole host of ideas for future shows, and I know that you've got another meeting right now, so I appreciate you sitting down and talking to me. This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we will see you again next week.